All right, four-star prospect Samari Matthews set to announce in just a few hours, and we talk about his recruitment, what we expect to hear, as well as SEC Media Days preview, and some other news and notes from the week in Gamecock sports. Locked on Gamecock starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler. I hope everyone's having a fantastic week. It is almost over. It's Friday. We're in a rainy Atlanta, Georgia. We got Media Days 2 days away. We got a big announcement coming from a four-star recruit in a couple hours. But before we get into any of that, I want to say thank you to everyone making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we're a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I have a voice again. I'm not going to cough up a lung today. And we also have a fantastic Friday sponsor for today's show, our good friends at Monarch Money. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. And remember to take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all capital letters, all one word, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. Let's get into today's show. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to get into a little bit of the latest rankings from another person here at Locked On. We're going to also talk about the latest with Samari Matthews, the four-star defensive back that's between South Carolina and Texas, where we think it's going to go later tonight. And also, we'll talk a little bit of Media Days and what to expect next week. I'm very excited for Monday. Shane Beamer and a trio of South Carolina players will be making their appearance at Media Days. So, busy week. Let's start with the Samari Matthews thing, okay? And let's start here because he's making his announcement in 2 hours, or in a couple hours, which is not the smartest thing to do in terms of, hey, let's figure out content to talk about right off the bat, when we are going to have a decision made in 2 hours and this could be old. But here's what I want to talk about, because I expect him to pick Texas, okay? But there was a comment today and a quote that was kind of circling from Steve Sarkisian that kind of gives me pause. And it's also something to think about, I think, just as a good point in general. And, the quote was from today. So it's a recruiting update. This is from orangebloods.com that said, Texas is approaching recruiting differently this year. Currently, the market is too high right now, and Texas wants to focus on retaining key talent going into next season. Texas wants to have enough money to retain key players after this season, and overspending on unproven high school players is not an option. That's actually not from Steve Sarkisian. I misspoke there. That is from Anwar Richardson on Texas's current recruiting philosophy. Anwar does a great job at orangebloods.com. Let's get into that for a second, because it's something we've talked about on the show before that I think is a really good point, and it's something that's fascinating that could really be its own show, okay? And that is, I think, going into the future of college football and talk about the teams that are going to have success and the programs that are going to have success and the head coaches and staffs that are going to have success, it's not necessarily only going to be, hey, who has the most Jimmys and the Joes, who has the best recruiting classes, all that kind of stuff. It is going to end up being, how do you get those classes? And not who has the most money, but who spends their money and allocates their money wisest. That sounds like such a cliche thing to say when you think about like big professional sports and like going out. I always use this example. Braves fans, you'll probably get it. Other people, you might not. Hear me out. Maybe it's a dated reference at this point. Signing someone to a Dan Uggla contract. Dan Uggla was a second baseman for the Miami Marlins for a number of years. And then the Braves signed him to a 5-year, $75 million contract. $15 million a year for him to basically flirt with 20 to 25 home runs and hit around 220. It was, and I'm probably off on those numbers. It's just what I remember from how frustrating of a job, or how frustrating it was as a fan to watch that amount of money be spent on someone that did not pan out very well. You see it, Juan Soto is a good example. He's got $765 million contract with the Mets, has not really lived up to what he had. Rafael Devers, and these are all baseball examples, but these are probably the easiest ones to bring up. Rafael Devers is a guy that signed a $311 million contract with the Red Sox and was like, I'm not playing first base. I don't want to play first base. And he gets traded to San Francisco. My main point is this. allocating your funds across all your sports and then also figuring out how much money you are going to spend on players in high school versus the portal and both, that's a big, big part of who is going to be successful moving forward in this sport and this new era of the NIL era and transfer portal and college football in general. Samari Matthews is a good prospect. He's a four-star player that is very, very talented. And listen, would love for him to be in the fold at South Carolina. You look at where he ranks across the board. This is a 6 foot, 180-pound player from North Carolina. He is a consensus four-star, like on every single site. He is a consensus top 150 player across every single site. I think 247 has him at 119. That's the lowest he ranks at any position. Now, Texas is loaded. I don't know how much money they're going to throw at this. I do know, and I said this a couple weeks ago, getting into a bidding war with Texas is a fool's errand because you are not going to win that war. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to win that war because unless you have a situation where a kid grew up in the shadows of Williams-Brice or his, family played there or went there or whatever, it's hard to manufacture a lot of allegiance and loyalty to something that is like so different. I think like South Carolina football and the program and culture that Beamer's building, it's very hard to manufacture that type of allegiance and loyalty to someone that's not a part of it. And when you're a high school kid, some people get it, but also it's like, listen, if you have no ties to this place and you're between Texas, who's going to throw a bag at you, versus South Carolina, then, that sometimes that choice is easy. I do love the fact that this kid is 6 feet. You talk about like his measurables and what he's done as a player. 6 feet, 180. He fits the criteria of what you want at that position. What Clayton White, what the staff has trying to basically kind of roll out as a box to check on what they look for in a recruit at that position. He fits all those boxes, right? He's a very good athlete. He's clearly a very good player. And for a while, you felt like you had a really good chance to land him. And they're going to fight, I'm telling you, until December for somebody like this. But also, you look at from a recruiting standpoint, his NIL value is at $164,000. I can tell you with zero hesitation and knowing full well that I'm correct about this, there are players in the secondary that are freshmen that have yet to hit the field. Cade Phillips is one of them. Committed to elsewhere a year ago and then all of a sudden flips and goes to Texas because the NIL package they offered him was higher. Sometimes nowadays, it's not just the NIL package per year. It's, okay, if you're going to give me 1.5 over 3 years, that's really good. $500K a year, $500,000, as a high school senior to realize that's what you're going to walk into the day you can sign. Awesome. But then somebody else will come along, and you see it a lot with Texas, you see it a lot with Texas A&M, you see it a lot with Southern Cal. And they'll say, 1.5 sounds great. We'll give it to you over 2 years instead of 3. That way, you're basically getting a 50% increase of or maybe it's 33%. I don't know. I'm not great at math here. But you're going from $500K a year to $250K or to $750K a year. And you're doing that in a time where you're saying, okay, and then we'll just reevaluate in year 3. That's a good deal. That's a good deal. I don't know the ins and outs of what he's being offered. I know his NIL valuation from On3 right now. And I know, speaking of specific players from last year's recruiting class that Texas ended up signing over other players in similar circumstances, those are the numbers that were thrown around. I don't expect Samari Matthews to pick South Carolina tonight. I do expect South Carolina staff to continue fighting for this kid. And one thing that they will have in their back pocket is they love to build this entire roster and this culture kind of from the ground up. The area of emphasis where they have for recruiting for South Carolina that is way more prevalent than anywhere else is at the high school level. They want to get kids in the high school level. They want to be able to have them be like buy into the culture early and then stay and figure out a way that they can develop them and turn them into the next players that are going to go into the NFL draft. You can find that in the portal as well. But in what is already a pretty loaded secondary and is already a class that's done really well, this is not something that would be a huge miss. It would be a great, great bonus. And again, just like the kid PJ Dean that ended up going to Georgia, this is one specifically that no matter what he says in a couple hours, like later tonight, continue to watch throughout the rest of the recruiting cycle because I don't think this one's over. All right, Speaking of what's not over, the show is not over. We're only 10 minutes in. We got a lot of good stuff coming your way. Before we go to break, I do want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Monarch Money. All right, before we go to break, do want to give a shout out to our friends at Monarch Money. Told you at the top of the show, our show today is brought to you by Monarch Money. And listen, if you ever wish managing your money felt easier, it is with Monarch Money. With Monarch Money, it can be whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase. Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So, in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth, which is a big, big difference. I tell you what, the moment I started using Monarch Money and realized how much I was spending on little, stupid, petty things like delivery. The girlfriend's looking at me right now. She's nodding her head, also shaking her head. Still mad about how much I was spending on delivery of a number of things. Monarch Money showed me what I was spending, helped me figure out a way to start getting better with my money and start building my wealth. I tell you what, you take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LockedOnCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LockedOnCollege, all capital letters, all one word, for half off your first year. All right, when we come back, we are going to talk about the latest rankings from somebody I'd consider a friend, so I'll call him an idiot, about the SEC and what he projects going into this year. That is up next. Locked On Gamecocks continues right after this. All right. What is that? Cool. All right. Welcome back into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler. Happy Friday. So here's what we're going to talk about real quick. And I want to, there's a couple things I want to touch on just because they're all kind of, just like almost like housekeeping things. One, there's no update on Russell Faison, his latest for the NCAA. It sucks. I can't believe the entire week has come and gone. We're now 51 days. I think we're 51 exactly away from South Carolina's opening kickoff against Virginia Tech over here in Atlanta, about a mile and a half from where I'm currently sitting. So frustrating, but that is the case. We also have media days coming up, which we'll touch on a little bit in the third segment. And the players that are going to be there, they announced it earlier this week for the entire SEC, and South Carolina did as well. It should be pretty fun. I'm excited. Listen, I love media days. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year. I know some people hate it, but I personally love it. It's always a lot of fun for me. The other players that are coming, Nick Barrett, Lenore Sellers, obviously, and DQ Smith, along with fifth-year head coach Shane Beamer. Shane Beamer coming into his 5th year as the head coach of South Carolina. I personally can't wait to see what kind of antics they pull or stuff they pull on social media. He is a really, really good public speaker and a candid public speaker, so I'm excited to see where that goes. Before we get into any of that, Spencer McLaughlin, who I lovingly referred to earlier on the show as an idiot, because we're all idiots, and he's a great dude. But he came out with his SEC rankings going into this year. Now, if you're listening on radio, or not radio, listen to the audio version of the podcast, you can't see this. Obviously, if you're on YouTube, you can. One of the reasons I have not talked about this all week is not because I don't necessarily agree with Spencer's rankings. It's because of how horrible the graphic itself looks. I don't know who decided on the pewter brown and the Carolina Panthers blue color as a combo, but it certainly was a choice. That is gross. But I will tell you his rankings and where he has everyone. It's honestly not far from what I had when I posted mine not that long ago. The top 5 are the exact same: Georgia, Texas, Alabama, LSU, South Carolina. After that, it's a little bit different. Oklahoma at 6, 7 Ole Miss, Florida 8, 9 A&M, 10 Tennessee, 11 Mizzou, 12 Auburn, Vandy 13, Arkansas 14, Mississippi State 15, and Kentucky 16. I did think it was interesting that he had the exact same bottom 4 as I did, and this exact same top 5, which was Vandy, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Kentucky at the bottom, because I do think Kentucky's the worst team in the conference. Now, taking a step back from this and looking at it, South Carolina at 5 is a good spot. And I think that one of the things that with South Carolina that's different than any other team is, I look at Ole Miss. A lot of people are high on Ole Miss because, they have Lane Kiffin. That schedule's pretty manageable. They do have to go to Alabama. I'm sorry, not to Alabama, to Georgia. and they get LSU at home and South Carolina at home. They play a joke of a non-conference schedule. So I understand having them up high because the key here, and it has been ever since they expanded the playoff, is you got to get to 10-2. Remember a couple of years ago when Notre Dame was this is like in the BCS era. Notre Dame had a stipulation in their like contract or whatever it was, which was basically like, hey, listen, if you win 10 games in the regular season, you automatically get a berth into a New Year's Six bowl. That is basically how the record wise how this is working right now for the college football playoff. If you get to 10-2, by all means, you're most likely going to be in the college football playoff. I'm talking about for SEC teams. Now, there might be a logjam at times where it's like everyone's 10-2. I don't know. We saw it last year with the 9-3 teams, South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Alabama. But all three of those teams, no matter how deserving we thought they were, and I thought they were in order. In order, I thought it was South Carolina, Ole Miss, and then Alabama in terms of deserving. Just so happened to be they were ranked the exact opposite way by the committee. Those three teams were left out in the cold, and that's we're not going to get back into all that kind of stuff. But I do think that getting to 10 wins is the key. If you're looking at South Carolina being at 5, the one thing I love about this spot for them and why I have more confidence in South Carolina over the teams that are directly behind them, like Oklahoma, like let me see here, let me pull this up. Who else do you have? Especially like Florida, especially like Texas A&M. Like I am way higher on teams like Ole Miss and Mizzou and Tennessee than I am on Oklahoma, Florida, and Texas A&M because the schedule that they have to play is much different. It's much different. South Carolina does not have an easy schedule, but I do know that the teams behind them, like Oklahoma, has a murderer's row. They got to go to Bama. They got to get LSU at home. They got to get Texas in the annual, middle of the year rivalry game, Red River rivalry in Dallas, and then they also have South Carolina on the road. That schedule is not easy. They also play Michigan week 2. I think it's at home, but it might be on the road. I think it's at home though. That's a daunting schedule. Okay, the other one that I just talked about, like Mizzou has one of the easiest schedules in the country. Looking at this from the lens of how manageable is it to get through not just the 12 games, but the 8 conference games that you are slated to play is a really, really big part of this. And South Carolina starts their year with an ACC team. They end their year with an ACC team. That is 2 Power 4 opponents they have in the non-con. That is not an easy slate to bookend your schedule with by any means. But in the middle of it, you just see team after team and opportunity after opportunity of where they can make waves and figure out in these little stretches, just like they did last year, to get to 10 wins. I think when you look at teams like LSU, I love how good LSU can be this year. I love like their ceiling. But looking at LSU and saying, okay, if they lose to Clemson week 1, like where's their next loss? Like there's teams that are set up for failure. Auburn is one of them, where it's like Auburn could be really good this year. Auburn could also go 2-3 in the month of September and lose to 3 pretty good teams all on the road, and then still not even have Bama or Georgia. Like they still have both those teams still on the schedule. I love the way the schedule is set up for South Carolina. I love the fact that they get Clemson at the very end. I love the fact that they get Bama on October 25th. They get Oklahoma right before that. They have a tough 4-game stretch in October. But that's where we saw this team kind of turn the corner a year ago. I think the biggest thing for South Carolina that people aren't talking enough about this year is we've seen this team in the past have very slow starts, and we've seen this team in the past really struggle on the road. Those things don't really seem to be an issue as much anymore. And I don't mean slow starts in games. I mean on the season. Those things don't seem to be as big of an issue right now. Like, it feels like you are going to overmatch Virginia Tech. It feels like you're going to be able to get out of the month of September maybe unscathed and look pretty good by all means, like going into the month of October. There are some difficult teams on the schedule. There's some difficult road trips. Going to LSU is not an easy trip. Going to Ole Miss isn't super easy, but it's also not super hard. The A&M game is kind of daunting considering what South Carolina's record has been against them up until last year. But you get so many key games at home. Alabama at home. You get Vandy at home, which by all means, it's like they're going to be a good test to get you prepped for the month of October when you play them in September. You get Clemson at home. You get Bama at home. You get Oklahoma at home. All those games, you now get in the friendly confines of Williams-Brice. You also don't have a ton of noon kicks this year, which is by all means not just because of a sweating standpoint in the heat, is a really, really big part, I think, and component of looking at the success that this team can have and where the ceiling is. Being at 5, I think, is exactly where they should be. I don't know if you're better than LSU. We'll find out. I don't know if you're better than Alabama. We'll find out. I do know that you could lose to both of those teams and still win the rest of the games, and you'll most likely be able to make the playoff. So and outside of Texas, every team ahead of you, this probably is the best point. I should have made it from the beginning. Every team ahead of you in those rankings plays a more difficult schedule than you. And Texas, by the way, road game at Ohio State, road game at Georgia, A&M at home. Got some other tough games maybe in between, but like those are 3 games that could it all end up being L's. They get like, they could also all being up, being wins. But Texas will be tested this year. Georgia gets Ole Miss, Bama, and Texas at home. They got to play Georgia Tech away from home. They got to play Tennessee early away from home. There's just, I'm not saying they're going to lose those games. What I am saying is every single team ahead of you, besides maybe Texas, has a more difficult or at least a very comparable and similar in terms of difficulty schedule that South Carolina has. So for the first time in a long time, when you look at this team going in, I'm not talking about talent wise, but you talk about like the potential like traps and trap games and obstacles and road bumps or whatever else. It feels like you're kind of even with some of those teams that are being considered and talked about in the top tier of this conference. And South Carolina feels like they're at least even with them in terms of opportunity. So, you know what? Let's just skip the SEC Media Days thing. We can talk about it later, and we're going to talk about it all next week. It should be a lot of fun, and we will get into that. But that is all for today's show. I hope all of you have a fantastic rest of your Friday night. We will be back talking about Samari Matthews after he commits, whether he goes to South Carolina or goes to Texas. We will talk about it for sure. If he commits to South Carolina, we will be doing another show again tonight and a live reaction. So fingers crossed, we are going to be busy. I think the only thing I have to do tonight is pack, which I would much rather talk about Samari Matthews coming in South Carolina than that. So appreciate you guys. Until next time, go Cox.